This sort of brings me back to to Bill's point that that generally, historically, it wasn't just the one singular event. It was sort of a nagging, long-term list of problems that led to plants generally getting to 0350. And I guess my question really is that really more what we're seeing with Fort Calhoun as opposed to the single operational event? Is this, and to sort of use the word, is this a safety culture problem that we really have at Fort Calhoun as opposed to an isolated set of circumstances?
I think my best guess is I think there's quite a bit of work to be done to really frame the answer to your question and with the systematic and defensible analysis. But yes, there are the cultural aspects at the facility as well that are coming into play. That our program, if in column 4, that's kind of the given. If you get to column 4, you have to do an independent safety culture assessment. It's almost assumed that if you reach that level of performance, that somewhere in the organization, to some degree, likely of significance, there are cultural issues at play.
And one would think that that's the hardest to assess and the hardest to fix, really, as you look long term. The last couple of plants that went through this process, I think it's been about 3 years in 0350, something like that.
The time frame for the last plant that went through was 3 years from the time they entered till the time they terminated the 0350 process. On average, the plants before that, and it's a little bit different, as Bill said, because the majority of those were before the ROP, but somewhere 2.5 years on average going through the process.
Largely because it wasn't just fixing 1 or 2 operational issues. It's really looking at this. It really becomes a safety culture, organizational performance. It's a broad issue.
That's correct. Let me elaborate a little bit. In my analysis, if you have the significant events, they're almost always the causes, and when you really trace the roots back, they go pretty far and are going to go pretty deep into the organization. This fire on June 6th was caught. I mean, it was a modification. It was actually well intended to improve the reliability of 480 volt breakers, but what resulted was a condition that was not a reliable configuration and actually induced conditions, and that characterization gives me pause. And so, you know, what's going on in that organization when you set out to accomplish something to make it better and you actually get the opposite result? That's going to trace back into
I had the exact same reaction. I was also looking at the yellow that got on failure to maintain external flood procedures, and one of the sentences in the discussion of this says the finding was determined to have a cross-cutting aspect in the area of problem identification and resolution, corrective action program for failure to take appropriate corrective actions to address safety issues and adverse trends in a timely manner. Sounds like safety culture issue to me. So I guess that when I look at this, you know, I think you've been in saying this in different ways as this got started, but this really isn't. This isn't about the flood. It's not about the fire. It's about the organization. It's about the safety culture of Fort Calhoun. And so I think it's important as we go forward looking at this to not overly focus on those specific operational challenges, but to really focus on the overall performance of the organization. Is that a fair way to look at it?
I agree completely, Commissioner. In our articulation, maybe we refer too much to the events and the incidents and the findings, but the reactor oversight process is very event incident driven. It's not doesn't have leading indicators. We react, engage based on the significance of what we see, and increase when the significance increases. And that's what we've seen at Fort Calhoun Station.
And I thought that, and I appreciated Commissioner Postolak's discussion about that aspect of it. And I recognize that the ROP doesn't lend itself to those kinds of I guess I say canaries in the mine shaft, but we do have the resident inspectors, and I would think that one aspect of the resident inspector's presence on site would be to give you personally some indication as to whether we are having organizational safety culture issues. Were you able, before we got to this stage, did Region 4 have indications of issues, even if it hadn't reached this point? But were there issues that you were concerned about?
I have two answers to that question. Yes and no. We are as true as we can be to implementing the guidance and procedures of the reactor oversight process. One of the values it brings is to put discipline and potentially numbers and guidance to any issue, what it means and what it doesn't mean. And so resident inspectors follow that, and we're true to it. So if it's not there, it's not gonna surface as a increasing engagement in the ROP action matrix. It's just not. And even subsidy cross-cutting issues don't change the action in the action matrix. I will say that it is a fact, and I rely heavily on the context and insights that resident inspectors develop at a facility. They understand what's going on there, and they can put context around an issue and a problem that you'd never get from the regional office and never get from black and white guidance. That does bring value and insight to us, and we try to use that. And that points us then to how we focus our inspection efforts. And we were seeing that at the Fort Calhoun station. So
it's a fair answer. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
A moment of forgetfulness there.
Thanks. I want to thank Region 4 and NRR. Elma, I want to go back to your comment you made in your opening statement about kind of three major challenges: one, maintenance and design; two, corrective action program; three, dealt with organizational effectiveness. I want to ask a couple of questions in those areas. Can you talk a little bit about this breaker replacement and the testing? That got my attention, and I wanted to maybe understand a little bit more about what happened and what should have been done.
The 480-volt breakers at Fort Calhoun Station, I'll let Troy provide some details here, or Jeff.
I'm very interested in what test did not occur that should have occurred, or any
Specifically what I was referring to there was, well, let me back up and describe the mod slightly. They were replacing the breakers, but they were of an older design. The newer breakers were not identical, and they were actually smaller, physically smaller for 480-volt breakers. And so the licensee opted on a path to retain the cabinets and the bus bar arrangements and fit these smaller breakers inside a larger cubicle, which resulted in the need to design it's called a cradle, we'll call it a transition piece, but the breaker has stabs which go into the transition piece. The transition piece has another set of stabs which are inserted into the bus bar arrangements. And I believe that our inspection and licensee review, in that installation, they didn't measure the electrical resistance between the cradle and the bus bars. Is that? And I'll let Jeff Clark speak before I say more than I know here.
Good morning. I'm the branch chief from the Division of Reactor Projects that has Fort Calhoun oversight. As Elmo specified, in that modification, it was going from one breaker style to another. You had to come up with this transition piece, as Elmo said, to have stabs. What we have determined through our inspection is there wasn't a rigorous process to determine that proper engagement of those multiple stab pieces. the actual location of those within the breaker cabinets was such that it couldn't be seen easily. You'd have to do some disassembly of the back portion of the cabinets. Some other things, such as resistance checks, thermography, or whatever, were not done to validate or verify that those connections were actually properly made, and that the modification then in turn would be effective going forward.
I assume there's quality assurance paperwork or some kind of a work completion form that would have some testing or some post-installation checks on this?
There was, and one of the complications we saw in there was that it was a misunderstanding with some of the craft and some of the QA, that they felt that some of those observations and readings should only be taken on the visible portion of the modification, and were not done because of the complexity of getting to the back panel.
This doesn't sound like it should be rocket science. I mean, I guess I've replaced lots of breakers over many years, and the nuclear propulsion program is pretty straightforward, just to do resistance check, and this is not complicated. So I'm trying to figure out, is this an unusual set of circumstances here because of the pieces that are not visible? I'm just trying to fathom the absence of the testing of this. That's maybe there's no answer for that.
There's the specific answer to that is going to be, part of our follow-up inspection to that as to why you didn't actually get into that aspect.
Okay.
But again, it followed in with the complexity of getting to the actual connections.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add 2 points.
Yeah.
One, this is the first time these had been done, this actual process and mod had been done at Fort Calhoun Station. So evidently there were some translation weaknesses or misses with how those were put in and how they were tested. I'll also add just we got to issue our inspection report on this, so we're very close to issuing, and I'm a little hesitant here to discuss.
I understand.
It.
Well, I guess but I understand this is a potential significant contributing cause to the fire. Is that what I heard from you? Yeah. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me go on to the third challenge you mentioned, Elmo, in the area of organizational effectiveness. And I appreciate you or anybody else at the table commenting on the existing Fort Calhoun management's capacity to address the situation they're in with 0350 and strengths, weaknesses, areas for improvement on the management ability to get their hands around these issues.
I'll start just by saying this is a significant challenge for the site, though, organizationally. Just being in column 4 by itself would be a challenge to any organization. This station is also challenged by the external event that they experienced with the flood, and we believe with the fire, the significant operational event that adds to the challenge the licensee has. So, by any measure, this is going to be very challenging for the organization. I think we need to see how they move through this with their cause analysis. The extent of condition for some of the equipment issues they've seen, and the extent of causes, and that's something we'll have to take a look at. I'm not in a position to say how that's too much uncertainty around that right now, too many unknowns.
Is a licensee getting any external assistance from other industry sectors or any industry coalitions?
Yes, I believe they are. They have entered into a contract with Exelon Corporation, and I believe they'll probably speak more to you about that when they're at the table.
Okay. Thank you.
They're getting external assistance.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As we go forward, there are, as I think, almost you talked about, a couple of pending potential greater than green findings. To what extent do those factor in at this point? If they've moved into manual chapter 350, do we then keep, if they've come out as more whites and yellows, does that have an impact on the ROP, or what do those mean going forward?
I think moving forward, technically, Fort Calhoun Station has been removed from the reactor oversight process. But we will develop those findings and make an assessment of the significance. And so what practically will happen is they will then, once they're finalized, be handed to the restart panel for consideration of of inspection and evaluation for licensee corrective action. It's not going to change our level of engagement at this point in time.
Given, I don't know, Troy, did you want to add anything to that?
I'd say if those findings that we believe would result in a greater than green result, those will go to the panel. The panel would add those to the restart checklist for resolution prior to restart.